Thank you very much, Lieutenant Governor. I really appreciate your kind introduction. I want to thank the Georgia Chamber for the opportunity to be here with you today. I want to specifically thank Ryan Mahoney for his gracious invitation. The Lieutenant Governor said some important words, and I hope they're heeded and listened to. And in my remarks today, I will underscore some of what he said. But let me start out by pointing out, you've sort of given me an impossible challenge. You've asked me to speak for half an hour. And in Georgia, I've got to speak slowly, which is already a challenge for me. But, you know, there's a lot of research on public speaking. And it all shows that in the first 10 minutes, the mind is able to absorb what a speaker says, and that the retention rate is very high. In the next 10 minutes, pretty well. Not everything, people sort of tune in and out, but you get a fair amount. After 20 minutes, everybody's thoughts go to sexual fantasies. So the ability to speak for half an hour means that's a real challenge. And as I said, I've got to talk slowly. But I really hope, people ask me, why do I do this? I do it because I think it's the most important thing that we can discuss. The Lieutenant Governor said that, but I think there is not the urgency in this country, not even now with the presidential election, for us to really get smart about the fact that the future of this country is in play. And it doesn't have to be the country that we all have lived in and grown up in, a country where the American dream was robust, where education made things possible. This could be a country in which you see it today on the front page of the New York Times. The middle class gets hollowed out. The wealthy will do just fine. But increasingly, the glue that keeps us together as a people will start to get pulled at. Because without this robust middle class, which we built in the first 80 years of the 20th century, first by requiring mandatory secondary education, and then after World War II by really opening up through all sorts of scholarship and federal and other programs, the whole post-secondary set of opportunities. And so up through 1980, we had a winning formula. But as you're going to see now, from 1980 to now, we're really not remotely where we need to be. And I'm not an hysterical guy, and the truth of the matter is I and my family will do just fine, and all of you will do just fine. But I want to submit to you, the question we're discussing right now is whether the American dream becomes the American memory on our watch. That's how serious I think this discussion is. Because the world is changing dramatically, and our education system is not changing at all dramatically. Just a simple kind of thing, like Lieutenant Governor Cagle was talking about, where we don't have intelligent vocational things. In New York, right before I left 2 years ago, I literally sat down with the president of IBM, Sam Palmisano, and I said, you're a wonderful man, you've done lots of things, but I really need you to step up big in New York. As a result of that conversation, there's a school now, was featured in the New York Times yesterday. It's a school in which we combined a community college, a four-year high school, which in itself is almost impossible to do. We put those together, and then we said to IBM, you design a certification program and a curriculum that will enable the kids who graduate from that school to be technicians at IBM. And everybody signed up for the school right now. It's just overwhelmingly successful. And those kids are so highly motivated because they know when they get certificated by IBM, they will be working at IBM. And the thing was so successful that Rahm Emanuel, who knew Sam Palmisano, Rahm Emanuel from Chicago, President's former chief of staff, called Palmisano and said, I'm a little upset with you because you gave Bloomberg a school in New York. What are you going to do for Chicago? So Palmisano said, well, we'll open one there too. And Rahm, being Rahm, said, that won't do it. He said, you got to open up 5 now because you opened up in New York first. So they've got 5 of those schools. But there's an example, though, of the kind of innovation which we're not seeing throughout the nation, but which makes such obvious and compelling sense. So let me start with a little drama. It's my favorite quote from H.G. Wells, human history is a race between education and catastrophe. And that's my way of saying, his way of saying what I said. The question is, does the American dream become the American memory on our watch? And right now, and the Lieutenant Governor sort of laid this out, but let's just get a few basic facts on the table. Today, just over 7 out of 10 of our kids are graduating high school, just graduating high school. So for the 3 of 10 who are not graduating high school right now, what's their future going to look like in the 21st century, highly globalized, very, very technologically driven economy, where skills are going to matter, where higher order thinking is going to be critical, and where education is going to be so much more important. When I started school in New York City in 1950, over 60% of our workforce were high school dropouts. Today it's 6% and declining. So the world is shifting for those 7 out of 10. But of the 7 out of 10, or 72% that graduate, half of them at least are not ready for college. We're playing a game. It's politically convenient to say we have a 70% plus graduation rate. But these kids are going to community colleges, and they're not going to college at all, and they're being remediated, and they're falling further and further behind. You know what the average graduation rate of most community colleges in America? About 20%. Think about that. 3 years for a 2-year program, 20% graduation rate. So if we had an honest high school graduation rate, we'd be looking at something around 30 to 35%. In fact, groups like the College Board and ACT, which do this kind of work, say about a quarter of our kids are really ready for college. Now that's a shocking number. Then you look at the international, you know, while we're sitting down, everybody else is sprinting ahead of us. I mean, this is unimaginable to me that America today, in America, we are basically in the middle in science, or toward the bottom, in the middle in science and in math, at the bottom in math, the middle of science and English, out of the industrialized countries. I mean, we are so far behind in math, the other industrialized countries, it is shocking. The World Economic Forum, highly reputable group, ranked our science and math. I was in the last session, they were talking about STEM. Our science and math programs, education in K-12, 48th in the world. When you think about how important STEM is to our future. So I submit to you, and probably the most important lesson of all is this one. For the first time in our history, our younger generation is less well educated than its parents. And only a minority of American adults believe the standard of living for their children will be higher than what they have themselves enjoyed. That's a shocking fact. Our 25 to 34-year-old kids are not as well educated as our 54 to 65-year-old. So that means we're not only staying flat, we're actually moving backward at a time when the world demands much more. And let me put to rest one thing. It's not about money. From 1970 to 2006, and this would go on to 2010, these are our high school scores in math and English on the national test, the NAEP, which you're familiar with. If you look at that, they are flat. On the other hand, we have increased by 1.5 times. In other words, we more than doubled the amount of money we're investing in K-12. Any of you ran a business like this, you never would have gotten past this bump, right? No, you wouldn't have gotten past, but we keep doing this. Most of this money is going for additional adults, largely teachers in the system, but we're not getting any return on the investment. And there's a fundamental and, in my view, critical message. When you see that chart, and you know, we're at a Chamber of Commerce, people know how to read those charts. When you see that chart, you understand that there's something significantly wrong. And what's shocking about it is, think about it, for the last 30 years since the nation at risk during President Reagan's administration, we've been talking about education reform and these issues. Everybody runs as the education mayor, the education governor, the education president, and you know, basically, while we've been talking, we're not getting any results. I mean, this is just an amazing flatline set of performance. Now, I think the reason for this was actually articulated from a surprising quarter by Albert Shanker. Albert Shanker was the president of the American Federation of Teachers, which was the teachers union both in New York and Washington, and he is the most iconic union leader of all. And here's what he said: it's time to admit that public education operates like a planned economy, a bureaucratic system in which everybody's role is spelled out in advance, and there are few incentives for innovation and productivity. Think about that. Every one of you. What is it about? It's about innovation and productivity in your businesses. You don't do those two things, you won't be here next year at this meeting. So it's no surprise that our school system doesn't improve. It more resembles the communist economy than our own market economy. Now remember, this was the head of the teachers union who said that. So this is not some right-wing ideology or something like that. This is core center. And I think if we're not willing to address these fundamental issues, we're not going to succeed. So for me, when I hear most of the discussion about school reform, it's all good, It's just way too small for the nature of the challenge. And if we don't get remedies that are commensurate with the challenge, we're going to continue to fall further and further behind. So I want to talk to you about what I think are potentially 3 big ideas that might actually change the game. They will be controversial. Lots of people will disagree with them. Lots of people will say they're not going to work. But I don't think, unless we're prepared to think in a very different way about these challenges, we're going to succeed. And again, I don't want to go back to this chart too many times, but it's almost impossible to imagine that basically our high school kids are performing at the same level in 2010 as in 1970, and yet we've more than doubled in real dollars. These are adjusted for inflation dollars, the amount of money we're spending. So if we don't fix this, we're going to continue to see this. And if we continue to see that in the 21st century, our kids are going to be more and more unable to meet the challenges that a global high-tech society requires. So the 3 things that I want to talk to you about, one of which is influenced by your charter initiative, but is real choice and competition. The second is to professionalize teaching, and I mean professionalizing. I don't mean tinker, I mean make it like law and medicine, and I want to talk to you about that. And the third thing is the use of technology, which now at News Corp through Amplify is something that I'm very much in the middle. And if we don't think about these 3 big ideas, all of them, not just one of them, then as I say, I don't think we're going to succeed. Now, a lot of other things matter, and I don't want to put those aside. The Lieutenant Governor talked about standards and talked about expectations. I've met some people here from community and schools, which are doing great work throughout the country, and I really appreciate what you all are doing, Neil, and your team. Those things all matter. But if all we do are those things, we will not succeed. If we're not willing to step up to the big things, then I think we're not going to be able to transform the system. And if the system isn't transformed, I think in the end, we'll continue to move forward, but not move forward with the way we need to. So let me start with choice and competition. And remember, think about the American economy. What drives it is what Shanker talked about, productivity and innovation. And in education, Lieutenant Governor said we have a 1960s model. The truth of the matter is we have an 1860s model. Our model was adopted from, well, think about it. You had one teacher in front of a classroom, same amount of kids, and nobody changing the game at all for those kids, basically. And all we've done is move from class sizes of 35 to class sizes of 30, and in some places 25, and in the lower grades 22 or something. We haven't changed the basic way we think about it. Think about the changes you see in the media, the changes you see in medicine. So we're stuck in a very, very different model of delivery. And that's in part because it's a government monopoly that basically says to people, you don't get a choice in your schools. And in every other field, you get a choice. Steve Jobs made a big point of this when he talked about why he didn't think we're getting the changes. Now, aside from the fact that that's the key to the American success, is innovation, which is driven so much by entrepreneurs, which doesn't apply to K-12. Think about the basic equity. I suspect, and I don't know you all, so maybe I'm taking a little liberty here, but I suspect there's no one in this room who would agree to let your kid go to every school in the Atlanta public schools. Right? There's some you might agree to, others you wouldn't. There's some you might love, others you wouldn't. But I've never met anyone in New York who said when I was chancellor, you could assign my kid to any one of those 1,600 schools. In fact, my own principals used to say about 20% of the schools I'd send my kids to. And I always used to say to them, whose kids should go to the other 80%? And I always said other people's kids. But you know, other people's kids are usually the neediest kids. In my city, in New York, often they were children of color, children who grew up in high poverty neighborhoods, children who didn't have an endowment at home or even a family structure that could help compensate for the failures of education. So think about it. We all insist on choice. When I adopted my four-day-old daughter down in Dallas, Texas, the one thing I knew for sure, I was going to get that kid a good education. And I would not just simply say, just give me the community school and that would be fine for me. We insist on choice for our children, but we don't insist on choice for everybody's child. And that seems to me to be not just a question of how we change the system, but a question of equity. Now think about this too. America's post-secondary colleges and universities, it is a choice-driven system. And to this day, while there are issues of cost and access, to this day, people come from all over the world to see our colleges and universities. nobody comes to study our K-12 system. Right? They go to Finland, they go to Korea, they go to Singapore. They don't come to America. And that's in no small measure because we have a system that's resistant to change, that doesn't innovate, and doesn't really build itself on merit, but builds itself on seniority. Now, I want to give you 3 examples of where I think competition is actually changing the game, and I would hope you go visit some of these. 2 of them come from experience we had in New York under Mayor Bloomberg, and 1 from a natural experiment post-Katrina, New Orleans. Let me start with the first. We changed in New York. We shut down 60 large failing high schools. Think about that. 60 large failing high schools that served on average over 2,000 kids. So we're talking about 120, 130,000 children were affected by this decision. We replaced them, working with the Gates Foundation and others, we replaced them with about 300 new small themed schools built on that model like IBM. Lots of community participation, lots of business participation, much smaller to make sure that the personalized experience, that the kids didn't fall through the cracks. We did this in our high needs communities. We have now got thousands and thousands each year kids going through these schools, and look at the results that we're getting. Well, first of all, this is just the point I want to make. It's a study I did with Condi Rice, Secretary Rice for the Council on Foreign Relations. Their choice and competition, 30-person committee with about 3 or 4 dissenters, choice and competition will fuel the innovation necessary. And here is the New York experience. So look at this. These are literally kids that applied to the same schools. Half got in, half didn't. So this is not about whether kids wanted to go there or not. They were oversubscribed. It's a true double-blind study like they do in medicine. And based on that, what do you see? The ones, we're talking now 2 cohorts, some 50,000 kids. The ones that signed up for these choice schools and got into the ones they wanted had almost a 9-point higher graduation. If they were from poverty communities, it was over 10-point higher. African American males, the most challenging cohort for us in New York, 10-point difference. And again, these are the exact same kids because these kids applied to the same schools as these, and you still got, and look at the difference in the numbers. At a minimum, and these are the more affluent kids, 7% difference. That is a choice system. Everybody in New York now puts down their top 12 choices. In fact, the guy who this year won the Nobel Prize for Economics helped us design this choice system based on a medical residency plan. It's complicated, but for the first time, a kid says, these are the schools I want to go to, doesn't get assigned to a neighborhood school. Now, the next 2 go right to the heart of what you're discussing about charter schools and choice. We had a natural experiment in New Orleans. After Katrina, the school system got wiped out. It's the first time this ever happened. And this is a tragedy of major proportion, what happened in New Orleans. But because there was no system left, they rebuilt, and 2 things happened. Almost 3/4 of the schools there were charter schools. KIPP and others came down there. And second of all, everybody got a choice. The kid basically could apply to any school system, any school in the system, and the parents would get into that school. New Orleans was a failed school system for generations. And now let's look at what's happening in New Orleans. So here's 2007 post-Katrina. New Orleans schools were 23% in their proficiency level compared to a state that's 60%. Look at how this has changed now. Over the course post-Katrina, you don't see that. If this continues, you're going to see a high needs, overwhelmingly African-American city outperform a very different state that typically was outperforming it. At this point, it was 60 to 23. That's 37% difference, and now it's 17%. They have cut the gap by more than half. Anybody who hasn't studied New Orleans should be studying it. And look at this. These are African-American kids. In 2007, African-Americans in New Orleans were 11 points below African-Americans in the rest of the state. So it was a huge gap. And this is African-American and African-American. Right now, African-Americans in New Orleans are 2 points ahead. They've totally wiped out the gap. Now, those are dramatic changes. And here's one we set out to do in New York. In New York, we decided to create a very aggressive charter program in Harlem. And Harlem was a high-needs community, low-performing community for us. And look what happened. In 2006, virtually every school in Harlem were traditional public schools. By 2012, a third of Harlem's third graders, almost half the schools in Harlem are now charters, and a third of the third graders attend these charter schools. And look what happened. We have 32 school districts in New York. In 2006, in math and in English, Harlem was 28 and 26 out of those 32. So basically, it was right near the bottom. Today, Harlem is 16th in math, so it's moved over in 6 years a dozen other districts. That is huge. And in English, it's gone from 26 to 18. And that, again, is basically moving a district and a half every year. What's fascinating, though, is the charter schools themselves are one of the top high-performing districts, 4th and 5th, which has pulled this up. But people always said, well, the charter schools cream the kids and less well-performing kids stayed in the traditional. Traditional public schools themselves have gone up 6 districts and down here 2 districts. And so not only have the charters been off the chart, but the public schools have themselves improved. So you can create a rising tide for all boats. Don't believe that these charters are going to leave it back. In fact, the competition stimulated real growth and real success in New York City. Now, the second idea, and I think one long overdue, is really to transform the teaching profession. We've got a big problem in America. America's teachers today feel disrespected, and they are not America's heroes. In education systems that succeed, and you go around the world, take Finland, which is the #1 system. In Finland, teachers are the heroes. They're the most well-respected profession. They're right at the top of the list. In places like Japan, a teacher, like a lawyer or like a doctor, is called sensei, which reflects earned respect. We have a broken model. Think about this. Almost half the teachers in America, almost half in America, quit in the first 5 years. If half our lawyers or half our professors or half our doctors were quitting, we would take a hard look at what we're doing, and we need to take a very hard look. It's built basically on a seniority life tenure model rather than on a professional model. And when I say transforming it, I mean really transforming it from its current model into a highly professional model. And again, I'm pleased to say that my source on this is Albert Shanker, the head of the union, who said, I'm convinced unless we go beyond collective bargaining to the achievement of true professionalism, we will fail in our major objectives. And by true professionalism, he meant a very different system. One that's built on very different admissions criteria to our education schools. In Finland, the top 10% of their high school graduates go on to their ed schools, and it's very hard to get in. In America, almost anybody can get into an ed school. Most of the kids who graduate from our ed schools come from the bottom half of our classes. They don't get the rigorous training in math and science. Go to an ed school and see what kind of training they're getting in math and science. People who don't learn math and science, who are not expert in math and science, are not going to do well at math and science when they teach it. If you think about today in America, 1/3 of our math and science teachers haven't even gotten an undergraduate degree, much less a graduate degree in math and science. And what we need to really create is a system that basically is built on merit, driven by excellence, polices itself, believes it's a profession, and thinks that its professional status is critical to public perception. It's a notion of earned respect, and it starts with, which is quite remarkable, in 1985, Al Shanker proposed that basically what we do is give each person a national 3-day test, like the bar exam, before we allow them to teach. 1 day on pedagogical principles, 1 day on basic content knowledge, and the third was actually a 1-year apprenticeship, minimum of 1 year, under a master teacher before you allow to become a teacher. Think how differently our teaching force would be and how differently our system would be if we truly went and professionalized. But if we don't make teachers the great American profession, we will not succeed. Nothing is more important. And don't believe, people say, well, it's all about money. In Finland, where teachers are the most respected profession, they get paid in comparable dollars to what our teachers get paid here in America. So money matters, but money is not the only thing that matters. And unless we're willing to really dramatically change and move away from a system built on seniority and life tenure, we won't succeed. And the third thing, which you all have been talking about some, and I'd just like to take a few moments to wrap up on, and it's what I'm very committed to now. When I was in New York, I decided that in the absence of a technological revolution, we won't succeed. And again, we have that old classroom model, literally, from the 1850s, 1860s, and so much is going on technologically. Now, it's not about giving a kid a computer or a tablet, as cool as that may be. What it's really about is changing the way we teach kids. Those of you who haven't seen it, take a look at Sal Khan and the Khan Academy. Sal's just about to come out with a book on this, but we can do things very, very differently. There was a science technology thing that was held very recently by U.S. News and World Report on STEM. And the editor of U.S. News and World Report, Brian Kelly, came up and said, and this strikes me as so obvious, and yet we're not thinking this way. K-12 teachers are crucial, but mining many thousands in the next few years won't happen. Technology is likely the missing link, the missing ingredient based on evidence that there are better ways to learn. Getting the good teachers to amplify their skills, that's the name of my company, Amplify, to amplify their skills is the only solution. You can't mass produce enough to meet the need. Now that is so critical to what's the way we need to think. So take the best and the greatest and think about ways to leverage them. And I'm glad to say that Brian Hassel, who spoke to you earlier today, is doing a lot of work on precisely this thing. But when you see the quality of the Sal Khan videos, or you see the kind of digital curriculum that people create, you're beginning to see the potential for thinking differently. Think about our high-needs rural areas in a state like Georgia. And how are we going to get really great world-class teachers there? Well, we can do that digitally. When I left New York, I walked into a classroom 2 days before I announced my retirement. And I was in a classroom up in Harlem, and I was watching a class Skype in a teacher from Arizona, right? In Arizona, it was 9 o'clock in the morning in New York, but 6 o'clock in the morning in Arizona. And so this teacher, before she went to teach in Arizona, would teach digitally, basically virtually, in New York City. And she was a great, great math teacher. Now, we're clever enough and innovative enough. And there's not just one model, and it's not going to happen overnight. But this is an entirely doable thing. We expect teachers to do it all in every other area of our economy. We've thought about the ways. Diagnostically, think what's going on in medicine. There are diagnostic things teachers could be doing that would change the world. We can do that for them so that they know if, in fact, Joel Klein is working on fractions while the lieutenant governor is working on decimals, and he understands fractions and I don't. There's no purpose spending time with him on fractions. But there's a way through technology I can drive him exercises, learning, video, games, basically, so he can be working in his pace and I can be working in my pace. And we can view this as competency. Cory Booker, the mayor of Newark, always says, we got it exactly backwards. In education, we hold time constant and performance varies. Suppose we held performance constant and let time vary. Suppose the schools became truly a school of one, a school we actually piloted in New York City. So this is really what we're doing now at Amplify, and I'm just going to give you, to wind us up, a quick video. So the first thing right here is called Amplify Insight. These are the Common Core standards in math, right? For each kid, we have a little assessment. This is not a standardized test, high pressure, or anything. Just a simple assessment that you do at the end of the class hour. See whether he's mastered fractions, adding fractions, subtract. So you see here, this kid has got 3 red. What that basically means is that kid has not mastered that. This happens to be right before pre-algebra, and then when he jumps over here to algebra. So how many kids like this are there in our classrooms who are red here, and if you try to move them through, because the teacher's got to keep moving, they're going to be red here. And when they come here, they're going to fall off the bus. At the last discussion, they said, why do people drop out? They drop out for many reasons, but one reason they drop out is if this is all red and they're not learning anything here, what are they doing there? Right? The kids feel lost in the sauce. I mean, he feels, so he's alienated and disconnected. He feels like he's not learning. Now, I can teach these kids these things. It may take me a little longer. It may take me a different approach. But we can drive content. so that somebody who's all green here can move here while this guy is learning red. And that's a data and analytics system that we've perfected. Right now, there's probably 3 million kids in America that we're servicing with models like this. Second thing we call Amplify Learning is a curriculum we're developing that will be really immersive, addictive, socially networked, the way our kids learn now, so they can work together in groups, personalized and analytically sophisticated, built on this kind of model. And the third thing is what we call Amplify Access, which I'm going to show you in a second, is basically a partnership we're doing with AT&T. I actually, last time I was in Atlanta, was to meet with AT&T. They've been a terrific partner to us to bring a highly optimized educational tablet that these kids can work off of. Let me just show you that.
From the moment you turn it on, the Amplify tablet knows who you are, what you're studying, what homework you have, and even when it's due. We've organized all your apps and content by course, so when you walk into science class, you have everything you need right at your fingertips. We've included a channel full of reference materials with rich, trusted content. There's also a bookshelf, like a library curated for you. It knows your reading level and your interests, and it has recommendations from your teachers and friends. And there's a channel full of great video content that's relevant to whatever you're studying. For each of your courses, it's got just the right combination of background material and interactive games, simulations that can help bring content to life, video, and of course, textbooks. These aren't last year's textbooks in digital form. They're engaging and interactive. You can highlight sections, look up definitions, and make notes right in the book. We're working on all new content designed especially for learning on a tablet. It'll have virtual worlds to motivate you, animation and game dynamics to engage you in rigorous material, and sophisticated analytics that tailor the learning experience to you. And that's just a sneak peek of what the Amplify tablet has in store for the future. You don't just see your homework assignments, you complete them here too. With the Amplify tablet, your teacher or tutor can give you real-time, instant feedback while you're writing your essay for literature, say. He or she can comment on your work by asking you just the right questions at just the right moment, in time for you to revise and improve it. And that's the most effective way to learn. You can also take part in group projects with your classmates or peers around the globe. You can use social media for learning. There's even an online tutor to give you extra help when you ask for it. It shows you a map of every math skill and concept you need to graduate high school, so you can see where you are now, where you need to go, and the gap between them. We know that if your learning can focus on those gaps, you're more likely to succeed. So the Amplify tablet lines up specific recommendations, books, videos, apps, and games, targeted at those gaps. The tablet's algorithms give teachers the ability to group kids quickly according to their progress. And of course, you can make adjustments based on what you know will work best in the real world. We've created a way to focus students' attention and share resources or student work with the whole class.
Heads up, guys. One thing you're not getting is how starch turns to glucose.
Parents can get access to how their child is doing on his homework, his grades, and about his progress over the course of the year towards the things he's expected to learn. And parents can get recommendations directly from their child's teacher on what books and apps they can buy to help through a web browser, smartphone, companion tablet, or even your TV.
I'm thrilled to say we've begun to reinvent school, and the best part is we're just at the beginning.
That's actually stuff we're now beginning to pilot in schools, getting an enormously positive response, both from the tablet, which, as I said, we're doing together with AT&T, and this curriculum, which is a highly digitized, animated, game-driven curriculum, which we've been working with teachers and middle school kids to develop. And starting in January, we'll probably service about 5,000 kids in a pilot. I'm pleased to tell you, one of the schools we'll be working with school districts right around here in Atlanta, so you'll be able to actually come and observe it. Now let me end with a couple of quick thoughts. The three ideas I served up, I told you would be controversial. I didn't disappoint you. A real choice system will be controversial. Transforming teaching from its current model to a true profession akin to lawyering and doctoring will take an enormous change. Right now, job security, tenure and seniority are the main drivers. We need to move to a system where excellence, innovation, independence are the main drivers. We can't micromanage our teachers into success. And technology, I think, creates the greatest opportunity and the greatest hope for real transformation. We'll have to do things differently from the way we've been doing them for the last century, but I think we have the capacity now and the ability, and I'm so excited to see the things that are going on, not just at Amplify, but throughout the country. But I want to end where the Lieutenant Governor started, because I think it's so very important. This country faces enormous challenges, economic challenges, budgetary challenges, entitlement challenges, cohesion challenges. All of those pale in comparison to the educational challenges we face. The countries that succeed in the 21st century will be those countries that out-educate other countries. And when you see what's going on throughout the world, you realize that other people are not standing still while we try to get our act together. So I think it's wonderful that the Chamber brought you together today to talk about these issues. All of you care about community, all of you care about state, and all of you care about nation. And I would ask you, in all candor, to prioritize these issues. When you're up there talking to people who are running for office at any level, ask them where they stand on the tough issues. I grew up a product of the American dream. I don't want this particular dream to get wiped out on our watch. Thank you for your attention today.